Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Oliver Leis, and I warmly welcome you to today's Esports Research Colloquium. I'm looking forward to Dr. Seth Jenny and Dr. Joanne Donoghue talking about the impact of taking mini exercises or resting breaks during esports. Dr. Joanne Donoghue is the Director of Clinical Research and Associate Professor at New York Institute of Technology, College of Osteopathic Medicine. Last time I checked, she has published 7 peer-reviewed articles on esports, including aspects such as physical activity, body composition, and physiological parameters. Beside research activities, such as being an editor for a health and wellness esports book published by Human Kinetics, she maintains her passion for running and fitness. In fact, she is a 7-time marathoner and a 2-time Ironman finisher, which is quite impressive. Dr. Seth Jenny is an assistant professor within the Department of Exercise and Rehabilitative Science at Slippery Rock University of Pennsylvania. He's a founding member of the Esports Research Network and editorial board member of the International Journal of Esports, and started researching video games and esports in 2011. In addition to other achievements such as authoring the textbook Technology for Physical Educators, Health Educators, and Coaches, Dr. Jenny has consulted higher education institutions in esports academic curriculum development and will start teaching esports courses at Slippery Rock University in fall this year. As you might have noticed, we have 2 real powerhouses present today. Before I hand over to the speakers, Phil, I want to acknowledge that this meeting is being recorded. If you don't want to appear in the recording, feel free to type your questions in the chat or send me a private message. Without further ado, I invite Seth and Joanne to talk about their research. Have fun. And thanks.
Thank you, Oliver.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
I'm going to go to the next slide.
Please.
So
we're just going to start that this was our latest publication of what we're going to discuss today with a little bit of background of why we got to this study. Breaking up prolonged sitting with a 6-minute walk improves executive function in women and men esports players. This was a randomized trial. I think the biggest question of why we did this study is how do we blend physical health with cognitive health and performance in esports players? And that's really what we were trying to do for this study. And keep in mind, this study was supposed to be in person. We were supposed to collect heart rate, blood pressure, but then the pandemic hit, and we ended up doing the study virtually, which was amazing. Actually, it ended up working out better because we had such an amazing array of people that volunteered for it. So what led us to take a 6-minute walk? Well, a study that Dr. Amber Sousa published in esports last year in 2020 from New York Tech, we basically had our collegiate players play for 2 hours, and we tested their executive function prior to and then post 2 hours of play with no break. And just to review executive function, because it's a kind of a broad term, there's about 7 different things that can fall under that. Working memory, flexible thinking, self-control, how fast we do, how fast we think, inhibitory processes. So what we found after these 2 hours of gameplay, and this was a mix of mobile players and FPS players, is that they decreased their accuracy and they decreased their inhibitory processes. They did get faster, but they were less accurate, so they didn't perform as well. So that study kind of led a little bit to where Seth and I went for this. So we can go to the next slide. And what we have here is a history. So all this research is based on previous research in non-gamers. It's in people who sit for prolonged periods of time. What we know is that prolonged gaming has massive effects acutely and long-term. Long-term, we know that people who sit behind computers or sit for 4 to 6 hours a day, they have early mortality, they have more risk of heart disease, they have musculoskeletal injuries. But that's very difficult to get across to a population that's that's young, between 13 and 25 years old. Very difficult to look at preventative medicine. Acutely, what we know is that there's some danger to this, that there's something called thrombosis, and that's a term that was coined by Dr. Beasley in 2003, actually. And thrombosis was in response to what they were seeing with the increased use of video game play, TV play, and what we were seeing in younger people is blood clots, DVTs, which is deep vein thrombosis, which eventually can and become deadly and become a pulmonary embolism. And what you see on your screen here are cases that have been published. These are not cases that you read about in the newspaper. Sometimes you do hear in the newspaper someone died of a blood clot from playing a game too long. These are just a sample of how young some of these clinical cases were. You could see a 13-year-old boy had a pulmonary embolism. A 12-year-old boy had deep vein thrombosis from playing for only 4 hours. And these are documented clinical cases of this. And although people can exercise, exercise is not enough to negate sitting for prolonged periods of time. And I think that's very important. And that's probably the biggest point we're going to stress today with Dr. Jenny and I, is that you can exercise, but if you're going to sit for 4 to 8 hours a day, you're still susceptible to getting pulmonary embolisms. They actually did a study back in 2015 that they said about 90 minutes was enough to negate prolonged sitting. But just a few months ago, the World Health Organization came out and their 2020 guidelines suggest that 30 to 40 minutes of exercise, intense exercise, is enough to negate it. But still, that's difficult for some people and not everybody exercises. So what we wanted to do is see, can we mix improving cognitive function while improving health? And this is what we know, again, from previous research. We know after 30 minutes of sitting that your cerebral blood flow decreases 30%. We know after 2 hours of sitting that your executive function decreases in gamers. And we know that after 3 hours of prolonged sitting, that femoral artery blood flow decreases by 50%. And that's where our risk of deep vein thrombosis occurs. Previous research showed, and this is in office workers, that a 2-minute walk every 30 minutes or a 6-minute walk over an hour can reverse the blood flow changes and completely bring them back to normal values. So what we wanted to see is, can we reverse the executive function decline while at the same time improving vascular flow? So we could go to the next slide.
Yeah, so what's really interesting about all the information that Joanne just gave you, I just was reading a study yesterday or the day before, which it was looking at the correlations between these statistics and people's current fitness levels, their cardiovascular fitness, and it's all independent. So you might think that, okay, if someone is, as such as Joanne, a marathon runner, all of a sudden, okay, they're good to go. They can sit as long as they want to do these activities because they're fit outside of these long, extended, seated durations, and that's incorrect. As Joanne just went through, just because you do exercise outside of long duration sitting doesn't mean that you are negating any types of potential cardiovascular issues later in life. So the purpose of this study was to evaluate executive functioning, which Joanne just described, those cognitive functions changes following 2 hours of video game play in highly ranked first-person shooter esports players, FPS players, across 3 different conditions. So condition 1 is they played for an hour, then they took a 6-minute walk break, and then they played for another hour. The second condition is they played for an hour, they did a 6-minute supine resting, rest laying on their back. And then the last condition is that they just played continuously for 2 hours. And our main dependent variables, what we were measuring was the primary outcome, executive functioning, which we'll get into those tests in a second, as well as gaming performance. And that was captured through wins and losses in kill-death ratio, which we'll get into in more detail. So here, this is our participants, our demographic information. I'll admit this person here. All right. So we had 21 participants. This is one of the big issues in esports research is Joanne was hardcore about let's try to get the same number of males as females in our study. And certainly, you know, we all wanted that. However, it is really difficult to try to get higher ranked female players because there's less of them. And so we were able to get 12 men and 9 women. And actually, that's probably more than a lot of studies in this area. The average age you can see was just around 21 years old. This was a randomized repeated measures design. So across those 3 conditions, it was randomized for those participants. And you can see the ABC type of order represents the 3 conditions I just described. We sampled through social media primarily. And the study, as Joanne said, the original idea was to be face-to-face and to collect more physiological measures. However, because of the pandemic, we transitioned to conducting the study virtually. And we were able to do that because, you know, the participants weren't exercising to exhaustion. There wasn't any real danger of them passing out while they're walking easy or resting. And we were able to pull participants from all over the globe, which was pretty awesome. You can see the flags represented on the screen there of the various countries of the participants. So the inclusion criteria were men and women ages 18 to 30. They played FPS games with over 500 hours of gameplay. They had the exclusion criteria. They could not participate in our study if they did not have a competitive rank, if they were colorblind, because that had impacted the tests that we were using, and if they had any types of hand injuries or chronic wrist pain, which could have impacted some of our outcome measures as well. In case you're curious, within our study, you can see our table 1, and we'll put the link to the actual study you can read, and it's open access, full text. So our players, participants played Overwatch, Valorant, Counter-Strike, those types of FPS games. 100, you know, the average hours played per week, 100% of them played more than 6 hours a week for the men. And about 3/4 of the women played over 6 hours a week. And then I'm not going to go through every single ranking, but we provide the actual rankings of the participants in the study as well. Let me go to the next slide. And I think, Joanne, you're up.
Yeah, so this is our protocol. And I know this looks a little busy and overwhelming, but I do like people to envision how we did this, because as a player, you can envision it. And also if you're a researcher looking to do a project, it's really important to really kind of map out what you're going to put your subjects through. So this was randomized, but the first one, if you look on top, we had them taking the executive function tests. What we used is Stroop color test in Tower of London, which I'll go into a little bit after this. So the players took the test online. It was a link through a company called Millisecond that they took it. We went through Discord, any way to contact them. They played for 60 minutes, but we realized that games don't end exactly on the hour. So what we did is we got in touch with them at about 45 minutes of play and said, okay, text us or let us know when your game ends. So we gave them a window of between 60 to 75 minutes. What ended up for our study, the average was they played for about an hour and 6 minutes before they took a break on average. And then they got up and we had it preset that they were going to do a 6-minute light walk next to their computer on a flat surface back and forth. We were in contact with them the whole time for the 6 minutes, giving them an update. Okay, you have a minute left. You have a minute left. We took the rate of perceived exertion. So for those of you who aren't in the exercise physiology world, the rate of perceived exertion and RPE scale, in short, is a validated tool to look at how hard someone's working. Like we said, we couldn't collect heart rate. There was really no valid way of collecting heart rate virtually across the globe. But this one, the subjects were actually shown this RPE scale, which is 6 through 20. And they told us what their effort was. And for the average for this study, the effort was between a 12 and 13, which is anywhere between a light effort and a somewhat hard effort. So the walking was a casual walk. I don't know if anybody else just lost. Okay, sorry, I lost the screen. The second arm that we did was the exact same protocol, except instead of taking a 6-minute walk, we had them lie down next to their computer for 6 minutes, and we made sure that their eyes stayed open because we wanted to keep it routine. We didn't want their eyes resting for one condition and not for another one. And then they resumed their play again for 60 to 75 minutes. And again, we texted them, said, finish up your game, and then they redid the testing measures at the end. And then for the one where they did continuous play, we simply just had them take the test, play for about 120 to 150 minutes. This one, it ended up being on average, they played for 2 hours and 7 minutes before the games broke. And then they redid their outcome measures. And then after they did all 3 conditions on 3 separate days, and they were not consecutive days, we gave them an exit survey asking their opinions, which Seth will go into a little bit after this. You're muted, Seth.
Sorry, thank you. So the main outcome measures, which Joanne's going to describe in detail here for the executive functioning, was the color word Stroop test. These are all computer-based tests, and the Tower of London test. And then relating to gaming performance, and we'll get into the limitations at the end, but we tracked wins and losses of the players, as well as their kill-death ratio, which is the number of kills divided by the number of deaths across each game. It was the percentage for that. And then with that exit survey, we captured the players' perceptions of what did they feel was most effective with helping their gaming performance. Was it the walk condition? Was it the rest condition? Or was it just playing continuously? So we'll get into those results in a second after Joanne explains the executive functioning tests.
Right, so the Tower of London primarily detects your planning activity, how well you plan. And if it's a moving activity that you use with your keyboard and your mouse. And basically, if you remember, sometimes when we were little kids, you had little blocks set up and you have to move certain colors to different blocks. And that's essentially what we did, except they actually now moved it virtually and you do it online. So the Tower of London, and the test takes honestly about 5 to 6 minutes to do online. So this one does primarily planning and deficits in your planning. Stroop effect does measurement more of your executive function and your delay and reaction time between congruent and incongruent stimuli. For those who are not familiar with, against executive function, congruent means if you look at the words there, you can see that the first word purple is in the color red. So congruent would be that the color purple would actually be the word purple, which is natural for us to look at. You could see now that all these words are in a different color than what they actually are. So it basically times how quickly you can detect that and hit your keyboard. These tests were originally, these are not new tests. These are tests that have been validated for years and years that have done on paper, but lucky enough for us, they were able to do it online. So what did we find out from this? So this is the really cool part of this study, and in technical terms. The walking break produced the fastest solution time and the fastest planning time out of all the conditions. So what does that mean? It means the walking break allowed people to figure out what they were doing faster and plan out what they were doing faster than if they took a resting break or continuous break. They maintained accuracy in decision-making. Maintaining accuracy in decision-making simply means that the amount they got right, because there is a correct answer when you do these tests. So you can get faster, but you might get more wrong. So that's not what we want. We want you to get faster and get them right. So the walking break allowed them to get faster and maintain their accuracy in decision-making. Second to that was actually the continuous play, believe it or not, that they got faster, but the continuous play decreased their accuracy. So meaning what I just said, they got faster, but they got more questions wrong. So, and that actually concurred with the original study that we did after that Dr. Ambasousa did, that showed that players didn't do as well without a break, continuous play. And then the worst one was the resting break, the supine break, where they rested for 6 minutes. They actually got slower and had a slower planning time. They maintained their accuracy in decision-making, but they were much slower than when they began. So those were really interesting findings. And now Seth is going to go into the players' perceptions of each condition.
Yeah, so this is obviously what I love mixed method research, because you can get the quantitative hardcore bones of it, but then the qualitative perceptions can try to help describe why those things may have occurred relating to the quantitative results. So after they did all the conditions, we sent them an exit survey, and here's some of the questions that we asked. So the first one is how do you believe the 6-minute walk break impacted your gaming performance? And almost three-fourths of the participants felt that the walk break positively helped their gaming performance. And you can see that that's the vast majority of those participants. A representative comment as to why they felt the walk break may have helped their performances. It was good to take a break, but I think its active nature helped me stay prepared physically while offering me more of a mental break. So you'll see, as to the people who did not like the rest break, they felt that sometimes that they weren't warmed up after they were just laying down, and it took them a little bit of time to get back into the actual physical movements that's required for the FPS game. And so that was one of the reasons why they liked the walk break, because it gave them a little bit of mental break, but also they stayed physically active for it. There were only 2 participants that felt that the walk break hurt their performance, and a representative comment from one of those 2 participants was, it was a light movement and didn't fatigue me, but it did break my focus on the game. So certainly with any type of intervention, you're going to have certain people that it benefits and certain people that it doesn't benefit as much. And so those were the perceptions of those participants on that question. So the next question, how do you believe the 6-minute rest break impacted your gaming performance? And so there's certainly less people that felt that the rest break positively impacted their performance, but that was 40%. It's almost like a 1/3 across the board between negatively and then no impact. So the people that did feel that it helped them, here's an example comment. I treated it like meditation. I focused and reflected on the previous games to try and prepare myself better for the following ones. And so it's interesting to get information about, if you're playing an FPS game and you take that break, what are some of these higher ranked players doing when they're doing that break? And so this comment shows some evidence that then these people are replaying the previous game to think about, okay, how can I improve on my subsequent games? A representative comment from the people that felt that the rest break hurt their performance. Here's an example. While the 6-minute rest itself felt great, when I got back to my computer, I felt slow and lethargic, and it took me a while to get back into the game and warm up again. And so you could take that from the perspective of mental slowness or physical slowness. And so it took them a little bit of time to get back into the rhythm, is why they did not necessarily like the complete rest break lying on the back in the supine position. So then we asked sort of the culminating question, which of the following do you think is most effective in helping your gaming performance? Which condition? The walk, the rest, or the continuous play, or there's no difference across any of the conditions? And more than half of the participants felt that the walk break was most beneficial in improving their gaming performance. And that also was congruent with our quantitative results. And here's some example responses. I can't tell why, but physically moving my body helped me feel more refreshed when I started the game again versus when I rested on my bed. Another example, the walking break definitely has the best impact on gaming performance. It helps you clear your mind while doing something physical. Even if you're walking slowly, it helps you calm down and forget the high pressure from the gaming environment. Your brain isn't going overboard anymore. So that specific participant maybe just wanted a distraction technique and not think about their previous game if it was a high stress game, as compared to a previous quote, which I read, where they tended to want to go over and think about that previous game and try to correct maybe errors from the previous game. An example quote from the participants who felt the rest break was most effective. Laying down rest allowed me to more quickly relax after being fairly tense during play, which made the mental reset feel more impactful on future play. And I'll get into that last quote in a second. So, summary of the key findings. This is, do you want me to cover this slide, Joanne?
Sure.
Okay. This is sort of what we looked at the whole study holistically and said, hey, here's the take-home points that we want people to gather from it. So breaking up 2 hours of gaming with a 6-minute walk in the middle improves executive functioning in ranked male and female FPS esports players compared to the continuous and complete rest conditions. And here's the key, without impacting FPS gaming performance. So that was not statistically significant across all the different conditions. We did not see any types of major performance decrease after the various conditions with kill death ratio or games won loss. So if you can take a break in the middle and get a little bit of exercise without hurting your gaming performance, then that's going to help with all of those medical issues that Joanne talked about at the beginning of this presentation. Also, over half of the sample preferred the walk break for the 6 minutes over those rest and no break conditions. And then nearly 75% of the sample felt the walk positively helped their FPS performance. So if we can add walk breaks into it without hurting the gaming performance, because that's where you get is this type of mindset with a lot of players. This was that last quote that I didn't read yet. So this was from a participant who felt the continuous play was the best. No break allows you to stay in the zone and keeps you warmed up. Pro esports players have been caught taking Adderall so that they can stay in game longer. Dedicating the most amount of time possible is the only way to get better at a game. It is exactly like a real sport. That's the type of unhealthy mindset that's prevalent in esports, where no matter what I do outside of actual practice, that's not going to help me as much as if I game for 8, 10, 12 hours a day. When this study shows that if we can throw in the walk breaks in the middle of gaming, it can help reduce some of those sedentary behaviors, but it also is not going to necessarily reduce your gaming performance.
So what's next? Most of the audience who's going to be listening to this, we assume, are probably mostly researchers. And Seth and I have had many discussions on where esport research is lacking, what some of the limitations are for it. If you go into PubMed and you do a search in other sports, soccer, or in Europe, as you call it, football, if you search, there's over 11,000 publications in those sports. In tennis, there's over 7,000 publications. If you look at esports, you'll look at this, they're in the double digits. So that's roughly 65 to 70. And then if you look at esports and health, you're looking at about in the 20s to 30s. And most of them are survey-based, they're not intervention studies. What really is needed is intervention studies on what improves performance. Some limitations of that are the type of gamer you're looking at. You can't mix professionals with collegiate players with casual gamers. So that's something that has to be separated out, which may be difficult for some people because some people don't have access to certain populations. Outcome measures are very difficult. The games vary greatly. So just to say taking a 6-minute walk improves gaming, well, what does it improve? First-person shooters, MOBAs, what does it improve? There's really a need for validated outcomes that correlate with gaming. So what do I mean by that? We did these executive function tests that are validated tests. We used Stroop, we used the Tower of London. We showed that that improved. Did that correlate with gaming performance? No.
Oh, we're doing a biology lesson here.
All right. Say we're doing a biology lesson.
We gotta remove this guy.
So
I'm
at
sorry.
least it was some light fun in the middle of breaking it up.
I can go to the next slide. Oh, it stays on there. All
It
right.
stays on there. That's fine. And one of the other things that I think some people might be is, where did we get 6 minutes from? We didn't just randomly pick 6 minutes out of thin air. When you're doing a research study, you need to justify why we took 6 minutes. And we based that on a study out of Dr. Christmas, who did a study that showed 3 minutes at 3-minute walking break at 30 minutes improved executive function in office workers. So we had to find a valid study that did that. So we realized taking a 3-minute break at 30 minutes of gaming is not feasible. Nobody's going to take a break after 30 minutes. So we wanted to make it more feasible to the gaming world, which is why we chose to double it 6 minutes at 1 hour. So validating outcome measures is another big part that we're lacking in the field. And also, I think separating out, women and men is another issue. There really is not a lot of studies that show a big change in executive function between men and women in general. But again, we don't know if that carries over to the gaming world. So that is something that I think people have to be a little bit aware of if they're designing the study.
Yeah, the only other slides I had were just social media, Twitter, and you can find Joanne and I on Twitter, and I gave the entire citation of the study to find more, but maybe I'll post it in the chat. So yeah, we're up for questions if people have them.
Yeah, you could type them in the chat, just saying.
Hi there. Just got a quick question, if that's okay. Did you guys do any pre-questionnaires of the athletes themselves? So looking at their regular activity levels prior to determine, well, maybe the individuals who thought that the walking break was really, really positive for them were actually already quite active to begin with. I wondered if you guys looked into that at all.
You know what? Actually, James, that's a great question. And we probably should have mentioned that. We actually just forgot to put it on there. We absolutely accounted for that. We actually gave them the International Physical Activity Questionnaire, the short version, to test their activity levels. We did want to see maybe the more active people would prefer the walking break. And what was interesting is, based on that, that it's called an IPAQ questionnaire, all of our participants were actually quite sedentary. Nobody scored at an active level.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah. That was a great question, though.
And we also gave that too to tease out somebody that maybe doing the 6-minute walk break wasn't safe for them. So we had to make sure that the participants were healthy enough to do this intervention, which was part of the IRB process as well.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I really enjoyed it. And I also like that you linked qualitative as well as quantitative research approaches and providing insight into their subjective experience of the resting break or the activity by walking. And I want to add that we recently conducted a study that showed that practitioners, performance coaches, as well as sport psychologists used walking as an intervention strategy to support players dealing with stress prior and after competition. And in terms of the quote that you used, Seth, about the Adderall.
Adderall, yeah.
We conducted an interview study. Phil was also co-author, and the minority of the participants also acknowledged that they use nutritional strategies such as drinking water, but others also said they drink alcohol or consume a lot of energy drinks. But this was something that I didn't experience before, I have not heard of. Can you shortly explain what Adderall is for everyone in your own words?
Yeah, so Adderall is actually commonly prescribed for people with ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and it helps with mental focus and also for those people helps with impulse control as well. And so it's called a nootropic, which is a cognitive enhancer. I'm surprised though that what you said, people would take alcohol. They're drinking alcohol to try to improve performance? Because that you would think it would slow reaction time and whatnot.
Should have
So I got a
described
question
this
for
more
you. What do you
detailed.
mean by that? Yeah.
After gameplay.
I can understand the caffeine.
Oh, after gameplay.
Okay, so
we
they can
asked for
forget about their
strategies.
loss. All right.
Or celebrate the wins.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm gonna let another person into here. We'll see if we get a nice picture.
Maybe he's the artist.
Yep. I want some gender diversity. We'll get some female anatomy picture on this one.
I can help with that. No. And would it be an idea for you to not conduct the study with actual gameplay, such as first-person shooters, but include softwares as AimLab?
Yeah, that's we've had that discussion, because this study took probably at least a year and a half to conduct. And so we've been having that discussion for over a year, where that would be a more objective measure for gaming performance.
Yeah.
And certainly that's a limitation of the study when we're talking about gaming performances. FPS games, the majority of them are team-based, and so your wins and losses and your KD are all impacted by who you're playing with. And so certainly the amount of gameplay as well as the randomized nature helped with that across the intervention in looking at the different conditions. But yes, having a more objective FPS skill being tracked, and how exercise or no exercise or continuous play would be impacted by one specific or several specific FPS skills within a software program is something we've talked about as a follow-up study for sure.
Yeah.
So you're stealing my ideas, Ollie. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it's funny, Seth and I just talked about that, how even if someone wants to look at fatigue or anything cognitive, these games vary too much. And we started saying that an AimLab is probably the most accurate way, at least to get some, good qualitative data as an outcome measure, because there's just too much variability with the games and the competition level that's out there.
Oh, no, sorry.
No, I was going to say that I know in social media we got questions about did we compare the various skills within the esports titles, and or the comparing participants across their rank. But because of the lack of being able to only sample from one FPS game title, we weren't able to do additional comparisons based upon what ranking they were, because not every FPS game title has the same ranking system. So that if we were able to only take participants from Valorant, for example, then we would have been able to do additional comparisons looking at, okay, well, this person's this rank, how did they do compared to somebody who's one step down from them? Yeah, I'm up for your question. Sorry.
Sorry to interrupt you. One of your p-values, I think it was on the fastest planning time on the walking scenario. It looked quite close to the threshold of point. I assume you use 0.5 as a threshold for statistical significance. Yeah. So it's quite low or quite close to 0.5 value. And I just wondered if you were to scale this up into more participants in a larger sample size, do you think you'd expect to see the same kind of statistical significance?
I do. And yes, I know the one you talked about, we were right on the border. We were trending towards being significant on some of them. I absolutely think that if we had a larger sample size, that we would have, that's just hypothesizing, but obviously, yeah, a larger sample size. Believe it or not, we actually, I don't have it in front of me. It's actually, I could look, we recruited. So, when you do a clinical trial, you have to report how many people you actually recruited for the study and how many people dropped out.
Sure.
We had, I'm actually looking now, 34 subjects is what we actually started with. And like Seth said, it took us a year to collect what we had with 21. So I think that obviously studies with more subjects would be ideal. And fortunately for Seth and I, we're pretty experienced at clinical trials, and we know to expect if someone tells me their idea, I can pretty much judge how long it's going to take you to recruit. Esports is so across the board. If someone doesn't have access, or if they're on a campus that only has 10 players, they're so limited, which is why I think the direction we might be able to go in is we can validate virtual outcome measures, and people can have a larger pool of people to pick from. And I think that's a really important avenue for someone to look at, not just player performance, but from a research perspective, validating outcome measures to esports that can be done virtually would be enormous for the whole industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's quite a good retention rate considering it ran for a year.
Yeah.
Look at that.
We did, if you read the study, we talk about, we did use a couple incentive items that participants were able to get if they completed all 3 conditions. And even before the first condition, they did this Stroop and Tower of London test as a familiarization of the test before the actual 3 conditions. So we really had to do 4 sessions with each participant, and then they had to take the exit survey. So it was a fair amount of asking someone to do that. And the only way we were able to keep the mortality rate low was to offer an incentive.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Just on that note, regarding significance, apologies if I missed this, and thanks very much for a very insightful presentation.
Mm-hmm.
Did you calculate effect size so you could determine sort of that coupled with the significance values of your?
We did. We had we did detect an effect size. We were at 80% for the effect size, but that can always, with more subjects, obviously, that still gets more improved. So.
That's cool. I just thought I'd ask just to sort of have a complementary sort of index to see, how much impact the data is having on each group, etc. One follow-up question I have regarding your interventions used, so the rest and the walking. Did you get any feeling from the data, or did you get any feeling from your own opinions on how that would manifest itself in competition? So are there any kind of drawbacks to, I think what you're doing is great, but in terms of it being live in an arena, for example, with everything going on, logistics, and I found that logistical issues do cause stress from our qualitative findings. What are your findings or thoughts surrounding that?
I guess I'll jump in, Seth, before I let you. Honestly, one of the things when I design a study, and I think Seth and I think is the first thing you think of is this realistic? When you say an arena, that's exactly what I thought about, because if you think about a basketball game, an arena, when they take a break at the quarter, they huddle. That's their break. They sit on a bench and they huddle. We're almost doing the opposite here. They're sitting, but they can take a short, if it's a mandated break, we did this in such a short space of people back and forth that you can have people just take up, pace back and forth in the corner for 6 minutes and come back and take their breaks. I think it's extremely realistic to have players do this under any circumstances. We had players doing this in small apartment buildings that you just need to. We didn't do it where it was a 6-minute walk going, out and back. It was literally going back and forth or walking in a circle. So I think, in an arena, it is extremely feasible to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that the generalizability of it from somebody's living room to an arena, you could have them do it backstage. You could, you obviously don't want them around the spectators and whatnot in a private area. As far as the laying down, that might be a little bit more. You could certainly do it on the ground. I think some of the participants, it was whatever they had handy. Most of them probably were using a couch, whatever they had nearby their computer. But you could do it on the ground, is probably as long as you had a pillow. It might be a little bit uncomfortable if you were laying down on the ground without a pillow or if it was a hard surface. But yeah, it's not like we had them go run 400 meters, because if we had them do some type of, or even use kettlebells or something like that would be a lot less transferable, because you'd have to carry the kettlebells there, or you'd have to have some access to a wide open space where it's safe for people to run. So both of these activities could be done in a small confined space.
I suppose what would be interesting in the future is to see in players' routines, do they start building in things like you're examining, knowing that the evidence suggests that it's beneficial? And it would just be interesting to see in the next months, years, whether or not the support staff are suggesting it, whether or not it's being implemented, because that's essentially what we want, right? We want to do research and we want to see it put into practice, but this is the building block. So great stuff.
Yeah, we'd like to have that put in the CSGO Players Association contract, that they have access to do a 6-minute walk and laying that supine rest in between matches.
Right. I mean, I always like to equate it like for regular traditional sports. I know when I was talking to our esport team, one of them said, yeah, you can't force us to take, when we're in it, you can't just blow a whistle and stop us in the middle of gameplay. And I'm like, but that's what every other professional sport does. You know, if someone's in the middle of time and they're in the heat of a moment, that whistle goes off, you're taking that. There's no other way to do it really than to do a forced break on teams. So I think my dream would be that would be the goal, you know, down the line. Be interesting to see how it gets implemented. Might not ever get implemented, but it would be nice to see.
I might have missed it earlier because I joined a little bit late. Was there any reason why you chose 6 minutes? And just to follow up on that one, if you were to decrease that to 5, 4, or even to 10 minutes, do you think you'd see differing effects?
Yeah, I did cover it a little earlier. It's in the paper. That was based off a few research studies, but primarily it was over a research study that looked at office workers. And after 3 minutes of walking at 30 minutes of sitting, so they'd have 33 minutes, they found an improvement in executive function. Then we took other studies that found on vascular function, blood flow, that they found a 3-minute walk for 30 minutes improved that. But we realized 30 minutes wasn't feasible for this. So we basically just doubled the time to 6. That's why we didn't randomly just pick 6 minutes. But honestly, that would be other studies. Someone could look at 3-minute walk. Maybe a 3-minute walk would produce the exact same results or better results. So, you know,
yeah,
that's
you could do with Rocket League, because the matches are, you know, shorter as compared to FPS games, and try 3 minutes. That would be another study that would be interesting.
There's plenty of opportunities for people to take this and run with it. You know, it's even like doing strength training. Is 1 set better than 3 sets? And the same, you know, you can do years of research on this. So hopefully we get the ball rolling and people can look at it different time frames, different times of breaks. So
yeah, it's brilliant. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
I've just got one final question, if I may. Have you considered measuring any kind of mental health metrics in the future to see how breaks, how physical activity influences that? Because obviously we know physical activity, mental health, performance are all kind of interrelated. And something that I'm currently examining is trying to examine the predictors of mental health in CSGO. And I'm very curious about how breaks and different routines, both before, during, and after competition, may influence sort of longer term constructs and metrics. So I just want to know if you've got any thoughts about, you know, in turn, how mental health might tie in with performance, and if you've got any plans for any research in that area in the future.
I know, so Dr. Amber Seuss is the one who did the 2-hour study that I had mentioned previous on. She was, we were kind of going down the avenue of looking almost at emotional intelligence and mental toughness and performance. She's a neuropsychologist, so it's more her field. And I know that was something that I've heard a couple of other institutions kind of coming out and asking about. So I think you're on the right track. I think a lot of people are thinking the way you are. And I think, you know, we haven't designed anything yet, but I have heard that, you know, in the work, people were curious to look at mental toughness and emotional intelligence and performance and fatigue.
Yeah, there's so many variables to mental health that would need to be a long-term study, and you know, you could do some type of correlational between the amount of exercise people do and their self-perceived mental health levels. But certainly there's a lot of research that shows that exercise helps improve mental health. And so I don't have any specific studies lined up in that regard, but yeah, I think definitely if we can show that it's not going to taking a break and walking is not going to reduce your gaming performance, and it also may help improve your mental health as well as executive functioning, then yeah, hopefully more people will include that into their routines.
So lastly, my main thought was just burnout. So burnout gets discussed quite a lot within sort of the industry media, and it gets discussed a lot within the academic literature. And again, breaks, coming out, going back in, just like in traditional sports. That's what I'm curious about. And again, less burnout, higher performance, higher mental health, higher sustainability. Everyone's a winner. So be interesting to see what people kind of connect the dots, so to speak, with research studies in the future.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, the mental burnout that you bring up. And that definitely would have to be separated by a collegiate level and a professional level, because one of the things we discussed on a collegiate level is the mental burnout, but also does it correlate with when finals come in academics and stress of being away from home, all these different things, as opposed to professionals who are doing this obviously more hours and are traveling more and doing different crazy hours. So I think burnout and correlated to the situation environment is an important avenue to take.
You know, and stress is stress, whether it's mental or physical. And certainly there's a lot of research that shows that the rate of perceived exertion is can be just as high with gaming versus doing some types of more physical tasks. And I think it's all about how, for burnout, it's how much someone is doing the same thing and they're not breaking it up. And that's what, you know, one of the purpose of this study is that, hey, let's break up your routine a little bit so that we're not having that mindset from the Adderall quote of the only way I can get better is that if I play more. You know, there's other ways to get better outside of playing more.
Thank you for the great questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks also from my side. I have I think a last one. What would you expect is the main difference between a walking break and exercising, for example, for 6 minutes? Would there be a difference you would expect?
What do you mean by exercise?
Physical exercise like push-ups or jumping jacks?
Well, I mean, from a physiological standpoint, I don't think there would be a difference. But we can't actually come right out and say that because we didn't examine it from a research point of view. But I think any kind of physical break for the 6 minutes would probably, hopefully, produce the same results. You know, we only looked at light walking, but I think push-ups, sit-ups, any kind of movement that increases circulation and blood flow would hopefully, you know, mimic the same results that we found.
Yeah, that would be really interesting to do a study where looking at HIIT training, high intensity interval training in between sessions to see maybe that would improve executive function even more than just light walking. I don't know.
That word, I think, scares a lot of people. I know the word exercise and HIIT might scare people, so that's why I always like to say just a physical break, light physical break. But it would be interesting. Again, there's so much opportunity out there for researchers. So it's really exciting.
Yeah, thank you. I think it would be a really interesting approach to have teams having group exercises before a competitive match or league game. This seems promising. And we also have a comment in the chat regarding the pausing mid-game. In League of Legends, it is possible to pause the game when in a tournament mode. But what I've heard from my players is that they feel out of the game and want the game to continue as fast as possible. So I wouldn't say from my experience that those kind of pauses help perform. As long as the game aren't over an hour, I won't pause the game for health purposes. After 1 hour, I have seen exhaustion mentally and physically though. Thank you for this comment. Yeah, I think this is what the results of the study has shown, that continuing gameplay is not the best idea for some players.
But
For the
there's a
mental
major
strain.
difference to that though, because that is pausing the game mid-game. So probably, I'm assuming psychologically, you're still invested in the game and that it's causing you more stress because you just want to get back into it. Our study, the participants finished the game they were on and they did not start a new game in that when they did the intervention. So yeah, this would be another example of a great follow-up study, because ours was FPS. This would be MOBAs and pause it mid-game and we might find different results. And that's what Joanne talked about.
Yeah. You know, in other sports, you know, if you're able to pause and do that, I mean, that's a tactic people use to actually, you know, kind of mess with their opponent, maybe break their thoughts. Some people might handle it better than others. You know, in basketball, again, I always use basketball, like a coach is allowed to time out, and they do that to break the flow. The other team's on a roll. They call a timeout, break the flow of what's going on. It will be interesting to see if that ever is allowed. It's allowed in chess. In chess players, you're allowed to, you know, pause it and take as long as you want. Be interesting to see if down the line they allow people to pause a game on one end to kind of break up the intense focus and maybe kind of psychologically mess with their opponent a little bit.
But you know, the other piece to it is that perception doesn't always match reality. So if you did conduct this study and the players believe that, oh, if we take the pause and I do some walking and I'm going to have worse game performance later, that might be the case, but it might not be the case. You're never going to know unless the study's conducted to see.
Yeah.
Okay, is there any other questions from the audience? Or is there something you want to say in the end, Beth and Joanne?
No, we have our Twitter feeds on there, and I know Seth and I field a lot of questions from people, not just about performance, but about ideas for research, kind of bouncing it off of us. You know, feel free to, you know, reach out with any ideas if anybody does have any ideas for research. I'm more than happy to help. I know people sometimes in the research field get worried that someone's going to steal their ideas, but this field is so wide open right now. I don't think anybody has to really be concerned about that. So just feel free to reach out if there's any other questions.
Yeah, just want to thank everybody for calling in, and looking forward to continuing with the field of esports research and moving it forward, and hopefully trying to get a more healthy mindset for players.
Thank you, Oliver, for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for joining and presenting. I really enjoyed your recent publications, and I think I will also enjoy your future publications that I'm looking forward to. Thanks everyone for joining, and have a nice day. See you on the next colloquium.
Thank
Goodbye.
you.